it's good, and I'm really blown away, to be honest with you, that we decided in November that we wanted to walk through the book of Ecclesiastes. We had no idea in November what was going to happen, and I'm just so blown away by how God has used this book to speak directly to us and really to address so many different issues and things that we have faced during this season. And as we're getting ready to wind down the book, I think we've got 4 weeks. Unless I'm feeling froggy, then we might just go 7, but I think we just got 3 more weeks left. That as we wind it down, I find the text that we're looking at this morning so pertinent to what people are experiencing. That even if I were to say, not just be doing topical things, this would be a text that I would probably pick to address what a lot of people are going through right now. And I'm amazed at how the Lord has used that for this community. And I mean, and really the idea comes down to this in the text, is that there are things in life that happen that are outside of your control. And there are things in life that happen that are inside of your control. The question is, what are you going to do with it? And as I think of this season, there are industries that have really thrived, and they did nothing to thrive. Like they just happened to be something that was needed during a pandemic. I mean, just think about it. Like, think of how great it would have been to have just a little bit of Zoom stock on March 7th. And we know they didn't do anything to use it, because if you use Zoom, it doesn't work very well. And so, during that season, it's kind of exploded and become this thing that people need, and the people at Zoom are doing okay. Did they do anything? No, they just were at the right place at the right time. If you ever tried to buy a webcam during this season, it is about impossible. I have one coming in the middle of June that I ordered for the 1st of March. Did they do anything? No, they didn't. They just were the product of something, an unforeseen situation that ended up being good for them. There are industries right now that are doing really well. And they didn't do anything different. They just were the product of some good fortune. I think of the toilet paper industry. You still can't find it. You go out there, you're like, what in the world? I thought we saw. No, we can't. And that's kind of a part of it. There are good things that have happened for certain people during this season, and they did nothing to make it happen. They just happened to be in the right place at the right time. Now, the truth is that there's also another side to that coin, right? There are people who were severely affected by what we've all walked through over the last several weeks, and they did nothing to deserve it either. I think of industries. I mean, I read a report, it was early on in this thing after they shut down Disney World, that Disney was losing about $1 billion a month. Did they do anything to make that happen? No. Just a product of what's happening. Even when I go into restaurants now, and you see the X's on the tables, and you think they're functioning at 25% capacity, and you just think of those poor servers that are in there probably getting about half the tables they would usually get. They didn't do anything to make that happen. That's just a product of the world that we're in. This would be a horrible time to be in the hotel business, right? No one wants to stay in a hotel right now. And these are things that happen in life that you really have little control over, but they still happen. And there's a big portion of all of our lives where that is just how it works. Solomon will point this out. But not only are there things that are outside of our control, Solomon also points out that there are things that are inside of our control. And I would just illustrate it this way. Maybe you were severely affected by an unforeseen repercussion of the coronavirus. Man, there's nothing you can do about it, but here's the deal. If you go home, carry that with you, you take it out on your spouse, you take it out on your kids, I mean, that is on you. That is something that you cost. That is something that you could have changed. And what Solomon does is he looks at both of these things and he says, this is life. It's going to come at you hard. Things that you can't control. But then there also are going to be times where life's going to come at you and the only person that you really should blame is yourself. And we see this in our text this morning. So if you got a Bible, we're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 9 and 10. And we'll start in Ecclesiastes 9, verse 13. And he says this. He says, I have also seen this example of wisdom under the sun. And it seemed great to me. There was a little city with few men in it, and a great king came against it and besieged it, building great siege works against it. But there was found in it a poor wise man, and he by his wisdom delivered the city, yet no one remembered that poor man. But I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. The words of the wise heard in quiet are better than the shouting of a ruler among fools. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroys much good. You see both things happening here. You see situations that are beyond your control, and then you also see situations that you can control. But first, let's just look at the part that's beyond the control. I mean, here you have, in the first part of this passage, a really evil thing happening. You have a small town, a small city that is being attacked by a great king. Now, Solomon doesn't give any reason for why this is happening, but I think we can see what he's trying to do is he's trying to point out something that at the very least is unfair. The people in this city, they didn't do anything to ask themselves to get fought by a great ruler, but it's happening. That it's something that's happening to them, and there's nothing that they can do about it. But then this hero emerges in the story, which is so interesting to me because this hero comes in an unlikely form. That Solomon describes him as a poor man. And this poor man somehow rises to prominence, gets some influence, and he figures out how to thwart the plans of this great kingdom. That a city is saved because of a poor man. And you think, well, that's great. True rags to riches story. That this poor man, surely he's going to be the mayor of that city now, right? And if he's not the mayor, then they'll probably at least build a statue to him or something, right? But what does Solomon say? He says he was forgotten. He says that there are people alive in this community because of one person's wisdom, and even though that is true, he is forgotten. And you look at it and you think, seriously? But this is Solomon just hearkening back to something that he said in chapter 1, verse 11. And it's this. It says that there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of the later things yet to be among those who come after. You will be forgotten. And this is a picture of a person doing a really good thing, being forgotten. And gosh, have you been there? You did something that you thought was really good. You did something for someone and you thought, I'm good. They're going to see that. They're going to think, I might even get a thank you letter for that one. Start feeling really good about yourself, about this thing that you did for someone. You're like, man, I am selfless. You just feel really good. And then days go by and you're like, no one even saw it. No one even acknowledged the good thing that I did. That I went out of my way to do this, and yet no one even noticed. If you're like me, there's probably a tendency when that's your story, just throw your hands up in the air and give up, right? So well, whatever, I guess I'm done doing that. And you see the key response in verse 16 from Solomon, and this is where he says, but I say, like in response to this person who's forgotten, but I say that wisdom is better than might, though the poor man's wisdom is despised and his words are not heard. He's like, keep being wise. And the beauty of our situation as we interpret that is we can interpret that through the lens of the New Testament. That we can interpret that through the lens of the gospel. The beauty of the gospel is that every single thing that you do is seen by Jesus. That those good things that you do that no one noticed, that were forgotten, he saw. And the day will come where you actually will stand in his presence and he'll tell you, yeah, I saw that thing. Good job. And I can tell you this, that in that moment, it's part of our reward. In that moment, when we stand in the presence of Jesus, the only thing that is going to matter is his approval. The only thing that we're going to want in that moment is his affirmation. And in that moment, here's the things that were done in secret. We can say with the beauty of the New Testament that no, we're going to continue to do good things even if people don't notice it, because someday there is someone who will notice it. But even though that's true, the problem or the challenge of life is that things come at us that we have no control over. This poor man had no control over whether or not he was remembered or recognized. But the thing is that what Solomon wants us to see here is that though that is true, though that is part of the reality, that is part of what we have to deal with, there are things that come our way that go poorly, and we really have no one to blame but ourselves. And you see him kind of start with this idea here in chapter 10, verse 1. He says this in a very disgusting picture. He says, dead flies make the perfumer's ointment give off a stench, so a little folly outweighs wisdom and honor. A wise man's heart inclines him to the right, but a fool's heart to the left. Even when the fool walks on the road, he lacks sense and says to everyone that he is a fool. If the anger of a ruler rises against you, do not leave your place, for calmness will lay great offenses to rest. What is he saying here? He's saying that foolishness ruins a lot. He's saying, yeah, you can have really expensive perfume that smells good, but you put a couple dead flies in there and it doesn't really matter. That what a fool does is a fool, they don't even have to say anything, essentially. He says they walk down the streets and they say, I'm a fool. Do you think that he's saying that literally someone is walking down the street saying, I'm a fool, hi, I'm a fool? No, what he's saying is he's saying that when you encounter a fool, you just know. That when you encounter someone that lacks wisdom, everything they are doing and saying is communicating the fact that they lack wisdom. There's no guessing there for you that you just know. And I think that the good thing about this text is that what Solomon wants us to see is that's actually preventable. You don't have to act like a fool. That you can stop being your own worst enemy. But even just to kind of make the case a little bit more, Solomon says this later on. He says, the words of a wise man's mouth win him favor, but the lips of a fool consume him. It's just like the more that they talk, the more that they're ruined is the idea. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end of his talk is evil madness. A fool multiplies words, though no man knows what it is to be, and who can tell him what will be after him? The toil of a fool wearies him, for he does not know the way to the city. He's saying, yep, this is something that you control. You don't want to be seen as a fool? You want to stop being your own worst enemy? You want to help your life go places where you want to go? Well, there's a few things you can do. One is you can be calm. Just be calm. I know that I don't know that anyone's ever had this situation happen before. You get really mad in a moment. You let your emotions get the best of you and just start talking, say a bunch of things in anger. I don't know of a situation where I've done that and I've walked away and said, I feel really good about what I just did there. What happens when you do that? You look back and you think, man, I look dumb. If you're really introspective, you look back on those moments and your face starts to turn a little red, doesn't it? Solomon's saying, be calm. He also points out here that, man, he's really saying your emotions are a bad guide to speak. He's saying be careful with what you say. Even the idea that a perfumer's ointment, which is a beautiful perfume, can be ruined by a dead fly. I mean, the picture there is one of a lifetime of trust that can be ruined in just a moment. There's some people, there are probably people in your life where they spent years building credibility, years earning your trust, and then in one thoughtless action, it was gone. And depending on the action, probably has a lot to do with how hard it was for that person to regain trust in your life, right? Solomon's saying, if you want to avoid that, learn some self-control. That if you want to avoid that, be careful what you say, be calm. Because a lot of those situations that we get ourselves in, they actually are avoidable. But then he jumps back into some stuff that you have no control over. Look at this here. And this has to do with authority. He says this in chapter 10. He says, there is an evil that I have seen under the sun, as it were an error proceeding from the ruler. Folly is set in many high places, and the rich sit in a low place. I've seen slaves on horses and princes walking on the ground like slaves. And then a little bit later, he says this in verse 16. He says, woe to you, O land, when your king is a child, and your princes feast in the morning. Happy are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobility, and your princes feast at the proper time for strength and not for drunkenness. With the spirit of things that are outside of our control, a lot of us, we don't really have a lot of control over who's in authority over us. We don't. What Solomon's showing, he's like, well, if you're born in the child of nobility, that's a good thing. If you're born to a ruler who is a child, that's a bad thing. How many of us had control over where we were born? He's like, there are things in life that sometimes the hand is stacked against you, sometimes it's not. And he's saying, yep, especially with authority. Even as he talks about things like folly, and he talks about how folly can mess things, there are people in authority, he's acknowledging there are people in authority who are there because of folly. That they're there because they did the wrong things to get there. And this is true of all authority. That you see this in government with a politician who makes lies to get a position that they wanted. That you see this in your workplace, where maybe someone is now a superior in your workplace, and they got there not by working hard, but they got there by knowing the right people and sucking up. And you're stuck looking at the situation and thinking, I did everything I was supposed to do, and yet here this person is in charge of me, and they're a fool. And Solomon's like, yep, that's how it works. Yep, that's life. Yep. And he points out something that's really frustrating, because he's like, even as you consider the folly of there are people in authority over you who are going to do things that are foolish, and here's what's frustrating. Sometimes they don't have to pay for it, but you do. Sometimes they are left completely unscathed by their foolish actions, and you are left to pick up the pieces, and they seem to be fine. And Solomon's like, yep, this is life. Yep, you don't have the control that you wish that you had. And it's frustrating. And this is why I love the book of Ecclesiastes. This is probably an idea that a lot of us have experienced in one way or another. And I'm so thankful that the scriptures don't ignore it, but they point it out. That the beauty of Scripture isn't that it talks about a world that doesn't exist, only that world is heaven. The beauty of the Scriptures is that they help us see things in this world that does exist. And here's the hope as you look and you think about this. Notice that there isn't really a solution that Solomon gives. It's because he already gave it. And it's that you fix your eyes beyond the sun. That where you're frustrated with authority, where you're frustrated with those in power, yeah, that's always going to happen in one way or another until our King is Jesus. And so let that angst turn your heart to Him. Because He can satisfy you. Because someday He will be the only authority, and actually when He does, He will get it all right. And we'll be glad that that's where we are. But then He jumps back in. So he kind of just weaving in and out of things that we can control and things that we can't control. And then He jumps back into this thing that we can. And I think He's trying to be funny here. And this is what He says. He says this in verse 8. He says, "He who digs a pit will fall into it, and a serpent will bite him who breaks through a wall. He who quarries stones is hurt by them, and he who splits logs is endangered by them. If the iron is blunt, and one does not sharpen the edge, he must use more strength, but wisdom helps one succeed." Verse 11, "If the serpent bites before it is charmed, there is no advantage to the charmer." I know that we've all dealt with that before, and it's just frustrating when it bites before it's charmed. But he's looking at these situations, and what Derek Kidner thinks in his commentary is he thinks that while these are unfortunate situations, these are all things that could actually have been prevented if he would have just taken time. If he would have just slowed down. It's definitely unfortunate, but if you're looking for someone to blame, it's the person who did it. I mean, just think about it. I mean, what kind of person falls into a pit they dug? Probably someone who's not paying attention or someone who forgot where they dug a pit. And at the end of the day, whose fault is that? Well, it's the fault of the person who dug the pit. I mean, what about the snake on the other side of the wall? Well, there's one way to avoid a snake biting you when you break through a wall. It's checking the wall to see if there's a snake in it before you break the wall down. But this is someone who's just hasty. They're not thinking. They're just breaking down walls. And oh my gosh, there's a snake and it bit my hand. And then you see the idea there with the blade, and he's like, yeah, you can use a blunt axe to try to chop down a tree, but it'd be a lot easier if you just sharpened it. And what type of person doesn't sharpen the axe but keeps swinging the blunt one? Well, someone who's being hasty, someone who's not taking the time. And Solomon is telling these stories. He's using this example to cause you to look at your life. And really, to look at some of the misfortune that has come your way. And what he wants you to do is you look at the misfortune that has come your way. He wants you to look in the mirror and ask, how much of it is my own doing? How much of it is because I wasn't thinking? How much of it has to do with me acting in haste and being irresponsible? The hard part about that is that I bet all of us can probably think of situations in our life where we were hasty, where we did something too fast, or we didn't think it through, and then we paid for it. That instead of being slow and thoughtful, we just kind of went full steam, and oh my gosh, after going full steam, we're now paying for that thing that we thought was a really good idea in the moment. And here's the thing, it might be fine and funny when you're doing it with a box of Legos and you're trying to make it by just looking at the picture and you're ignoring all the directions, but when you're talking about your life, it's really unfortunate. And I imagine there are probably people here, but you probably know people, where you sit there and you look at your life and you're not where you want to be. You consider your circumstances and you're like, this is not where I thought I would be. And what this text is forcing you to do is to say, okay, how much of that has to do with me? Are there mistakes that I made that I could have prevented? Are there things that, honestly, if I could do it over, I would do differently? The beauty of it is that tomorrow is a new day, and there are some things that we can control. And Solomon wants us to see that life is a product of both. He gives another example a little bit later in the text, and it's kind of embarrassing to me because I showed you guys pictures of my shed, but it's about delayed maintenance on your home. Look at this here. He says, through sloth, the roof sinks in. And through indolence, the house leaks. What's the picture there? Well, if your roof is leaking, it's your fault because you probably put it off. That you keep saying, I'm going to fix that tomorrow. I'm going to fix that tomorrow. And then you have a really big problem on your hands. Why do you have the big problem on your hands? It's because you kept putting off the little problem that was there. And Solomon's saying, look at your life. What are those little things that you need to fix? What are those little things that you've been ignoring that you need to deal with? What are those? He's like, if you keep ignoring those little things, eventually those little things turn into big things, and you have a sunken roof or you're falling in a pit that you dug. And as funny as the idea is of someone falling into a pit that they dug, eventually, if you do that enough times, it actually just becomes really sad, and it's not funny at all. And what Solomon wants you to see is that if that's where you are, there's a good chance that you're there because of you. And he gives another example of how this works with words here in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 20, where he says this. He says, even in your thoughts, don't curse the king, nor in your bedroom curse the rich, for a bird of the air will carry your voice, or some winged creature will tell the matter. Have you ever heard that phrase, like a little birdie told me? It actually comes from this, like that's where it comes from. And the idea is that, if you say things about people behind their back, eventually they're going to hear. Eventually it's going to get to the person you're trying to not know. And what is he saying? He's saying, and when that happens, when the things that you said that you didn't want someone to hear, when it gets back to that person who hears it, you've only got one person to blame. It's not the person who told the secret. It's the person who you see when you look in the mirror. And this is life. And as we look in this season, I think that there's a couple things we need to consider. Some of you are here and you're facing challenges. And you're facing those challenges at honestly no fault of you. And that's life. And it's unfortunate. And then some of you, you're blaming things beyond your control for why you are where you are, when the truth is that if you were to look in the mirror, you'd probably have to claim at least a little bit about being the reason why you are where you are. So the question then is, okay, so what do I do with this? And as I close this morning, I just want to talk to really both groups. First off is that if you're the group who you're looking at your life, life has been hard, it's come at you in a really difficult way, and you are not where you want to be, don't beat yourself up. It happens to everybody. And if you are the product of unforeseen circumstances that are completely outside of your control and you just don't, Solomon says that's going to happen. He says that life is going to hit you in that way, and here's what you got. You've got a God in heaven who knows the future, who can help direct your steps. And he would also encourage you that in those moments where life comes at you that way, to also remember the good that comes too. Because like we said earlier, there's also good that comes that we did nothing to deserve either. And Solomon shows us this in verse 19. It's kind of like it's a little bit of a nugget, but he says this: bread is made for laughter, wine gladdens life, and money answers everything. I really wish I could explain all that to you, but I can just tell you this, that it's a picture of the good of life. That he's saying, in the same way that there are things that are bad that are beyond your control, there's also good things that you're able to enjoy, and that you just get to enjoy them because of the hand of God that gives them to you. So notice both. And then to those of you who are here, you're looking in the mirror, you kind of feel some conviction of some of the things that you've done, and you're realizing, I am my own worst enemy. Maybe you're thinking of a lifetime of decisions, or maybe just a bunch of recent decisions that have put you in a place where you're like, this is not where I want to be. What Solomon wants you to consider is that today is a new day. That there's not a lot you can do about what happened yesterday, but here's what you can do. You can make tomorrow better. You can slow down. You can be calm. You can be careful what you say, and you can make it a point not to speak in emotion. So you can be thoughtful with your life, and you can learn from your mistakes. Because really, I think that all of our hearts as we walk away from this message is that, while life might be full of a lot of self-inflicted wounds, we can change that we can fix the things that we can fix. And so as I close, I want to read you an example from Jesus, where he kind of wraps all of this together in a bow, and he addresses the things that we can control and the things that we can't. And this is what he says here in Luke's Gospel, chapter 13. He talks about a very unfortunate situation. And he says, those 18 on whom the tower of Siloam fell and killed them, do you think they were worse offenders than all the others who lived in Jerusalem? He's telling a situation where a tower fell on innocent people and innocent people died. And he's saying, this just happens. They didn't do anything to cause it. They were just minding their own business, and this happens. You can't control it. But then he gives another example of something that can be controlled, and this is what he says in verse 5. He says, no, I tell you, unless you repent, you will all likewise perish. What he's saying is there are things that are going to come at you that you can't control, but here's what you can control. You can control where you are with God. That you can control what you're going to do when you're confronted with the truth. And the question is, are you going to repent and respond? Or are you just going to throw your hands up in the air and give up? There's a beautiful prayer that deals with this, and it's called the prayer for serenity, and that's really how I want to close this morning. I think it's a good prayer as we respond. It says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking as Jesus did the sinful world as it is and not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Would you pray with me this morning?